Good evening. My name is Mayor Dan Rowe, and I've been the mayor of Roseville since 2011. I was on the city council for 4 years before that. That's what affects my math there. But I wanted to take this opportunity to welcome you here this evening to this first of 2 evenings of discussion about the intersection of our community aspirations to be welcoming, inclusive, and respectful, as well as safe and law-abiding, and how that relates specifically to the topic of immigration. It's great to see a number of people here this evening who are interested in this topic. And the important thing that I wanted to start by saying is that this is a two-part endeavor here. This evening is an opportunity to learn and ask questions and get information about the topic. And we've got great panelists here who will be introduced shortly that can help us with that process. And then tomorrow evening at the Roseville Skating Center, or at the Oval as some people call it, we will have an opportunity for some small group discussions that will help perhaps provide some guidance to the city as to what, if anything, we might do in terms of policies on this issue. And so that's the process that's outlined for this two-night effort, and wanted to make you aware of what that is. So hopefully everyone who's here this evening will be there as well tomorrow night to be part of the conversation where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. We're pleased to have, as I mentioned before, some great panelists. We'll get to them very quickly. Once again, what we'll be doing, it will be explained by our moderator, Marquita, as well, so I won't get into a lot of detail of that, but there will be an opportunity for folks to participate in tonight's conversation as well. And as you can see, there are some microphones out in the audience that will be used for that purpose. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Marquita Stevens, who's our moderator this evening and has been helping us through the past 2 conversations that we had last year in this Imagine Roseville series, and is doing a fantastic job. And I'll just turn it over to her for introductions.
And let me add my welcome to tonight's Imagine Roseville's Night of Inquiry on immigration and how to exact safety and peace of mind within Roseville's borders for everybody. I'd like to first thank all of you who have participated in the community conversations, without whose candor and concern we wouldn't be at this point in the discussion. It's heartening to see that at the heart of this inquiry lies moral aptitude. Roseville residents and all of its leaders should be proud to be part of a community that is being proactive with an issue that will impact residents, employers, and employees and patrons just because they're here. Give yourself a round of applause for being so awesome. I'd also like to thank the Planning Committee for their hard work and commitment to seeing this through, for scheduling space, recommending talent, which you'll hear from here and in the audience, and just plain getting the word out. Our format tonight is a simple one. Each panelist, you have a short bio on each one. They'll speak for up to 8 minutes. As moderator, I might ask questions of them immediately after their presentation if I think clarity is warranted. At the end of the last presentation, the question and answer period will begin. There are mics set up in each aisle, one on the left, one on the right. Those of you on the outer edges, if you think you're going to want to ask questions, you might want to move in toward one or the other just to make it easier. In asking questions, please address a panelist or a resource person and not each other. In addition to panelists, the following persons are here tonight to answer questions or provide clarification on matters that fall within their area of expertise. They are Chief Rick Mathwick. Okay, there he is right there. Mayor Dan Rowe, who you heard from already. Our city manager, Pat, okay. Mickey from the International Institute of Minnesota. She's with Refugee Resettlement. And then Kitty Groggins with the school board. There she is. She raised her hand back there. So if you have any other questions, while we didn't have everybody be a panelist, there are other resource people in the audience that can answer any of the questions that may come up. Now, please note this event is being recorded for future broadcasts, so everyone be on their best behavior. We hope you are pleased with the breadth of viewpoints and information assembled this evening, and in addition to your own expertise, should enable you to make an informed recommendation tomorrow night. This is really all about making sure that as you move forward in your deliberations about whether or not to designate Roseville as a sanctuary city or freedom city or safe zone or whatever, that you do so from an informed position. So we were very deliberate in trying to bring together a breadth of talent to be able to help you in your deliberation. One last thing before we begin. Should any of you be unable to attend the meeting tomorrow night, which is part 2 of this session, now for good previously scheduled reasons, you can send me an email with your recommendation and your reasoning, and I'll make it available to the group as part of their deliberations. You can see me at the conclusion of the evening. Now for the panelists. We'll start on my far left.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Catalina Morales, and I am an organizer with Isaiah.
Good evening. My name is Kelly Dolphin. I am on Lauderdale City Council, just in your neighboring city, and I'm also an immigration attorney by day at Kim Hunter Law.
Hello, my name is Jana Kooren, and I'm the Public Education and Communications Director for the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU of Minnesota.
Hi, my name is Amiin Huarn. I work with Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota. I'm also an attorney. I'm currently there part-time, and I have my own office in South Minneapolis. I practice immigration law. I am a former refugee myself from Somalia. I settled here in Minnesota with my family back in 2000. I was 15 years old, and a lot of Somali families were also settling at the same time. Some came before, and some came after. So I just want to give you a little bit of a background and to the Somali community that you hear about or see in the Twin Cities that you interact with. So Somalia is on the east coast of Somalia. A lot of people will refer to the Horn of Africa. It's kind of like the 7th lengthy country, kind of that looks like the Horn, basically, or the number 7. But all the Somali people that are here are not from the Somali Republic. A lot of times you might hear the words Somali, Somalian, Somalia, all these words that people would use interchangeably, but they all mean different things. For example, a Somali is a person, a Somali person, and instead of Somalian, it's not a word. It's really not even. It's just incorrect. A person who considers himself Somali could be from Djibouti, could be from Kenya. They could also be from Ethiopia. They could also be from the Republic of Somalia. So when you see somebody from Somalia, it doesn't automatically mean that person's from Somalia. They could be from one of these other countries. So predominantly this, let me just back up to just give you a context and background of why the Somali community is here and how it all started. So I don't know, maybe since the starting of time, since the beginning of time, Somalis lived in East Africa. They were just the Somali people. We didn't recognize borders or country the way it's recognized today. So, but it was just a people and land they lived on. Majority of Somalis were kind of nomads, moving around the country with their herds of camel and sheep and goats. We also had settlements, cities on the coastal towns mostly, but also within the country, throughout the country, and smaller villages and throughout the country. All along, Europe just decided one day that, Europe's too small. We probably depleted our resources, maybe not enough technology. Let's explore, let's stop fighting each other, let's go over to other people to fight them and take their country or whatever. So Europe decided to conquer Africa. Oh, there's a new continent, we found it and all that. They came, just invaded and divided up. Before they divided up, they decided, they started fighting each other over Africa. Somalia was not an exception. It was just one of the other countries that different countries from Europe were fighting over. The Italians, the French, the Portuguese, the English, they were all kind of fighting over Somalia. One time, the Italians completely dominated Somalia. Another time, the Italians pushed them out. So it was kind of like going back and forth. By the time Europe decided it was not feasible to continue doing this, and they decided to go back to their countries, they said, you know what, let's create countries for these people. So they've said, for Somalis, let's create, divide them into 5. Let's create 5 different countries. So there would be, we will liberate 2 parts, one part controlled by the Italians and the other part by the British, and say, let's call that the Somali Republic. The other parts, let's give one part to Kenya. Let's give another part to Ethiopia. Let's keep one part colonized by French, the French. And the Somali people, of course, didn't recognize that. They had aspirations and started, talking about independence and having their own country, this. But as soon as they left, we had a mess in our hands. Kenya was like, nope, we're not giving that back. This is how the world now works. Ethiopia was saying the same thing. The Somali people didn't like that. So they thought, excuse me, my cousin lives over there. I don't recognize this border and all that. Conflicts started happening immediately. 1960, so Somalia gained independence. The Somali Republic gained independence in 1960. So June 26th, the North gained independence from Britain, and then the July 1st, the South gained independence from Italy. So those 2 countries merged and became one country, Somalia. And all of a sudden, the part that was added to Kenya was like, okay, we want to join Somalia. The part that was added to Ethiopia was like, we want to join Somalia. So the conflict started. The first war happened in 1964 between Somalia and Ethiopia. This conflict continued happening different levels. Sometimes it was very hostile, like the 1964 war between Somalia and Ethiopia, and 77 between Somalia and Ethiopia again, and some skirmishes with Kenya. It never stopped. So we have created this kind of enemies within our neighborhood, neighbors, saying, you know what, you guys are troublemakers. You're not following the rules. Guess what? We're going to be supporting anybody who's against your country and government. So, long story short, Somalia collapsed in 1991. Completely collapsed. The system collapsed. Obviously, there was a dictatorship, and then there were like just different guerrilla groups or resistance supported by different countries fighting on the corners, and all of a sudden, the country collapsed in 1991. That has created a lot of people to leave the country, to run for safety to Kenya, Ethiopia, the neighboring countries. So when people ran, they settled in refugee camps in either Ethiopia, Kenya, Yemen, across the Gulf of Aden. And all of a sudden, this was supposed to be temporary places where people would stay for short term, and then Somalia would become normal, and then people would go back. Everybody thought that would happen. But it just continued, and this conflict just went on forever. And then when people realized this was going on for 10 years, longer, the UN said, asked the Western countries, would you resettle some people into your countries, please? And graciously, some countries accepted, like the United States. So the United States accepted some families from these refugee camps to come to the United States. The first Somali group that settled here were just looking for work. They were looking for work that did not require English language, so they found abundance of that in Minnesota in the 1990s. Once the first group settled, they also found a very nice and hospitable Minnesota community that welcomed them, and they were like, oh, these people are so nice. We can actually live here, even though it's cold in the winter. It's still nice. So people just start following other people. They were like, oh, there are jobs over here. Come over here. If you get here, you find a job easily. That was the first group. And then the second group started saying, this doesn't feel like, you are outside of your country. I mean, there's a large Somali community. You can find help. So-and-so that you knew from Somalia lives in Minneapolis now. You can come, and people start coming. And Minnesota continued to be the #1 secondary migration for Somali refugees resettled in other parts of the country, continuously coming to Minnesota. So the majority of Somalis that you see, whether they are from Kenya or from Ethiopia or from other places, who live in Minnesota came through either through the refugee resettlement program, if they were from the Republic of Somalia, and some from Ethiopia. Others came through just other means, like students coming here to study, family members petitioning for their relatives to come with them, and these things. So that's the majority of Somalis who settled here. There are also a few, obviously, individuals or groups who came seeking asylum. Specifically, recently it started that we see a few people that are coming through the southern border seeking asylum to come to Minnesota and the United States. So the question is, what kind of concerns do Somalis have about the current immigration climate? First of all, if you are not a citizen, you always have immigration concerns. First of all, if you do anything, very minor violations of the law can take away your status in the country and can put you in deportation proceedings. A lot of people don't realize that right away. They think once they're here that, you know, I'll just be here and no one's going to take my documents away, but that's not the case. So a lot of people are fearing that. A lot of people also are still waiting for families to be resettled. You might hear people say, oh, Somalis have been around for over 20 years now, maybe 15 years, but last year, there was a Tayo Consulting, the Somali organization that has done a research into how recently Somalis have been coming to Minnesota. And they have found out that about 19% of the Somalis in Minnesota have been in this country for less than a year. So families have still been coming, either through family members petitioning for them or through still the resettlement programs. We have such a wonderful resettlement agencies in Minnesota, I should add, like the International Institute of Minnesota, who resettled me and my family. And also, you know, Catholic Charities and Lutheran Social Services and all these wonderful organizations. So a lot of families are still coming. So a lot of people now are concerned about immigration. The concern about immigration was just constant. I mean, once you are here and you're not a citizen yet, you're always kind of concerned. Even when you are a citizen, you know a lot of your family and friends and people that you know who have fears and make sure that they stay out of trouble and they try to get their documents in order. But now, with this current political climate, we had the highest levels of government. Our president currently, when he was a candidate, continuously calling out the Somali community, coming to the airport and saying, you know, Minnesota has suffered enough of the Somali community, Somali refugees, and all these things. So yeah, there's a definite concern about the current policies and the changes. So there was the Muslim ban, you all remember, that affected, you know, the Somali community. You know, I mean, it shocked the Somali community. It just didn't affect them. It absolutely shocked them because a lot of families were stranded in the airports, stranded in overseas. It was almost killing their dream of reuniting with their family members. I think my time is up, so I'll just take questions. It's just a very large topic, and I'll just stop it at that.
Okay. Hello. I'm here tonight to talk about sanctuary cities. What does that mean? What are some examples? So first of all, I would like to point out that there's actually not a legal or an official definition of what a sanctuary city means. So when you hear that term used a lot, sanctuary city, sanctuary place, there's not a standard definition. And that could mean when you're hearing about sanctuary cities in California, Washington, Minnesota, that could mean something very different depending on city by city. So it's not always a term that easily describes one thing. So one of the things is that when I might talk here, as I'm going to talk about different things, is that I won't always use the term sanctuary city because they're called different things and if you want to have precise language. So there's different ways you can show as a community or as a city that you want to be supportive and welcoming of immigrants, right? So, I was asked to talk a little bit about the idea of a proclamation versus a resolution versus an ordinance. So when you think about those kind of three levels of actions to show that you are a welcoming and friendly city, a proclamation would just say, we want to be a city that welcomes and is friendly to immigrants. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has any actual legal standing for the city's obligation to do anything. And a resolution could maybe have some things that it lays out for the city to do, but if you want to have something that actually has something that's going to make you follow that, for example, it's actually going to be enforceable where the city would actually have to do anything, then the path between those, the strongest one is going to be an ordinance. Now, at the same time, when you're talking about an ordinance, we also know that there's been cities across the country who are getting called out by our president, by others, for being a sanctuary city. So it's not like becoming a sanctuary city, or most of those cities are called separation ordinances, or putting into place a separation ordinance doesn't come without potential consequences, especially with our current administration. I'm going to talk a little bit about now what's has happened in some of the places in Minnesota, and then I'm going to walk through some of the things that at the ACLU we are pushing for that we would like to see cities to do. So not many cities have separation ordinances in Minnesota. We know Minneapolis does, St. Paul does, and Northfield has recently as well. Others may have passed things that are more like a proclamation or a resolution, but those are the cities that we're aware of. Other cities around the country may have passed similar separation ordinances. I have printed out copies of the separation ordinances from both Minneapolis and St. Paul, and they're at the front of the stage if you wanted to pick them up to see examples of what other cities have done as an actual ordinance. And once again, once an ordinance, then it can be enforceable for the people who work in the city. So that would include the city police department, right? That would include, you know, other city workers. But since Roseville is also a resident of Ramsey County, it would not apply to Ramsey County sheriffs, for example. So the sheriff would not be forced to follow the city ordinance policy that you could decide to pass here. So what does a great ordinance policy look like? Well, for the ACLU, we've laid out 9 things that we would like to see cities do, and those are down there as well. It's called model policies and rules. And we have things about, first of all, a judicial warrant, and it should require that officials shall require judicial warrant prior to detaining an individual in any manner for the detention. A lot of times when agents or somebody shows up, especially ICE agents, Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents, they don't actually have a signed judicial warrant, right, when they go to somebody's home. And even though a city ordinance doesn't apply to federal officials, it's still good to have policies in place that would always require a judicial warrant to detain people, because you want to have that secure foundation of a signed warrant. And the other matter that happens is one of the biggest things, and this is one of the things that President Trump calls out a lot, is federal government officials want jails and municipalities and polices and sheriffs to hold immigrants in custody for them. These are called ICE holds. So let's say an immigrant is picked up for anything, DWI, disorderly conduct, whatever the offense may be, where they're actually booked into custody. And a typical person who is not an immigrant could be released as soon as they post bail or as soon as they appear in front of a judge, right? And then they should be free to go. But how ICE holds work is that they want the federal government would ask that they're held an additional 48 hours past when they could normally be released. So Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent could decide if they want to come to the jail and if they want to start, you know, processing them or do something with them as ICE. And so that's one of the things that needs to be addressed in a separation ordinance. This is also one of the things that President Trump is most critical about, right? This is what he's calling cities out for doing. He wants them to be held. The key thing is that these ICE holds, they are requests. They are not a legal order, right? The ACLU and others have done litigation around this around the country. We just settled a case where a city was forced to pay out tens of thousands of dollars in southern Minnesota in Nobles County for doing this exact same thing that President Trump is wanting people to do. Right, so it's putting your city at risk because our Constitution says that you have to have a legal reason to keep people in jail. And if they can show up and post bond or post bail or be released because the judge does so, holding them past that puts the city at risk. Right, so when there's a request that goes out, it's merely that, it's a request, and the city does not have to honor that, and they put themselves at risk when they honor it. And do you think that President Trump showed up to defend Nobles County? You know, no, and granted, he wasn't president when this happened, but the federal government did not step in to defend Nobles County when we sued them over the ICE holds, right? And he wouldn't do the same thing here. So if your city engages in this practice, you open yourself up to lawsuits from organizations like the ACLU or other organizations that does work defending immigrants. So that's one of the big things that your separation ordinance should have. So we also, another thing that President Trump wants to see is to see more cooperation, right? They want to know who's in jail. They want to know, you know, what their nationality is. They want to know all sorts of information. What's their country of origin? All of that. And while some information has to be public, and there's not a lot your city can do about it. For example, Ramsey County automatically publishes right online the record of who was booked into jail, right? So ICE agents can access that just as easily as someone else can. But what sort of information is collected and shared on that. And they want as free flowing of information as possible so the ICE agents can learn everything about who's being in jail and who could they go down and try to, deport or start to go through other immigration proceedings. So having a really clear division about what sort of information and how easy ICE can have access to it is something else that could be addressed in a separation ordinance. So really clear other things that an ordinance could have is talking about when clear identification to deciding to the extent of when ICE has been granted access to the facilities, when they're going to be notified that they're speaking with an ICE agent or Customs and Border Patrol, are they wearing duty jackets, making their badges visible, making it really clear who they are and what they're doing there and when they're given access to your county jails, and keeping in mind again, right, that the city of Roseville, people are booked into the county jail. So there's only so much the city can do for these, but it's helpful to have as many people speaking out for the city of in the city of Roseville, right? Because that can trickle up to Ramsey County. There's also other things in here about private information, talking about releasing personally identifiable information, right, about their custody status or their release date to ICE agents. That way the ICE agents don't know, how long until that person could get out, so as soon as they have to get there. And so I'd encourage you to kind of look over some of the things that we recommend that are in a good separation ordinance. And the last thing I'll talk about is what about the idea of being called out, right? What about the idea of President Trump withholding funds or his executive orders that he's passed? And what does that mean for Roseville? And first of all, I want to say this is not legal advice, right? I'm not here. You guys have your own attorneys. But I would say that it actually looks pretty good as far as Trump's being able to enforce executive orders so far, right? You may have heard, some of you last week, that on the 25th, that a federal district court judge has issued a ruling blocking enforcement of President Trump's executive order seeking to cut federal funding to sanctuary cities. So we have a really good foundational base in a federal district court opinion to kind of uphold cities' right to do this. And the budget that just passed today, there was also good news, is that in the budget that was passed today in the House, they cut out the provision that would strip the funding for cities that pass some sort of a sanctuary or separation ordinance. And with that, I will end.
So, as I said, I practice immigration law for a living, but Lauderdale also recently had its discussion on sanctuary cities, or becoming a sanctuary city, and what kind of the options were. So I'm going to try to answer questions separately. If you have questions of me in those two different capacities, I don't really want to muddy the waters. But as far as what I'm going to be speaking to you about to start, it's basically what the options are for people who are here who are undocumented and the different classifications of immigrants in the United States. First of all, obviously, if you're a U.S. citizen, whether you're born here or you're naturalized, you're never going to be deported. That's not something that happens to U.S. citizens, and even having U.S. citizenship revoked or opting into rescinding your own U.S. citizenship is as rare as it gets. I mean, I don't know of any cases, actually, in which that's happened, but definitely not recently. As far as anything below that, status-wise in the United States, it starts with lawful permanent residency. That's also known as folks who hold green cards. Basically, if you're not a U.S. citizen, you are always at risk of being deported from the United States due to various different events that can trigger that, okay? So that's really important for people to know. The other thing is, if you are put into deportation proceedings, it's really important to consult with a lawyer. I think Amiin would probably back me up on that. So if you have family or friends who are in deportation proceedings or who are worried about their status in the United States, I strongly encourage them to consult with an attorney about what their different options are. So I'll go through what some of them could be. This isn't legal advice for any particular person, but it's certainly highlighting different options for people in different circumstances. Beyond green card holders, there are refugees and asylum seekers in the United States. Persons who are designated as refugees were designated outside of the United States, many times in a refugee camp, at which point they were designated because they had a fear of returning to their country because of persecution based on race, religion, national origin, ethnicity, or being a part of a particular social group. This is really important for people to understand because that designation is made outside of the United States, and once people come into the United States, they actually have to wait a year before they can get their green card. So we're just working backwards down the line here. Asylum seekers have to meet that same standard, but that's a designation that is made in the United States. It's something that people can apply for affirmatively. So let's say someone is here, immigration doesn't know they're here, or they're here under some other sort of visa status. They're always welcome to apply for asylum within 1 year of arrival in the United States. Again, same designation. That person has to convince immigration services that they have been persecuted based on race, religion, national origin, or being part of a particular social group or ethnicity. At which point, once they gain that asylum status, they can apply for their green card 1 year after that. I hope I'm not getting too far into the weeds here. I know people are probably starting to fall asleep, so I'll try to make this a little bit easier to understand. There are also visa holders in the United States. You can apply for a visa before you get here, at which point you might be given the ability to work in the United States. That doesn't make you a green card holder. It doesn't make you a citizen. A lot of times people are confused about the status that they have when they hold visas. Once your visa expires, you're required to leave the United States. If you do not and you are an overstay, you also are at risk for being put in removal proceedings. Other sorts of relief you can seek are deferred action. Daca is a common application that people make when they're in the United States and they are graduates of high school or have obtained their GED. At that point, if they reached their 16th birthday in the United States and meet certain other requirements, they're available, or that application is available to them as well. Family members can petition for certain family members outside of the United States if they're in the United States and have residency or citizenship. Victims of crime are also allowed to apply for what's called a U visa under certain circumstances. But what I really want to talk about is the criminal record that affects people who are here, who are undocumented, or who hold lawful permanent resident status or any of the other statuses that I just spoke about. Basically what happens is when a person is arrested, as Jana was saying, they're taken to a jail, they're booked at that jail, and that facility has the choice of how they're going to treat that person, okay? So if someone is undocumented, if someone has an accent, if someone doesn't look like someone who grew up in the United States, whatever that means, and somehow someone at the jail at which they're booked thinks that it's a good idea to find out that person's immigration status, okay, that's an issue, okay? That's an issue for immigrants all across the nation, locally, in our state, and like I said, nationwide, okay? It's a very scary thing to be arrested by a police officer as an immigrant because it opens you up to the liability of ICE finding out who you are and what your status is. Once that happens and ICE picks someone up from being in an immigration hold, that person is most likely being put into removal proceedings. Removal proceedings are difficult. They oftentimes take weeks, months, maybe years to complete, during which a person can be in custody for weeks or even months. That includes green card holders, okay? That includes people with Daca, that includes people with active visas in the United States. And so when we're talking about immigration holds, the real issue is what is the separation between what a state is required to do, what a city is required to do, and what federal law enforcement is able to compel states and cities to perform as far as tasks or favors or whatnot. So the law, okay, under the federal code is that a city and state cannot actively thwart the federal government's ability to perform its job, okay? And that's fair enough, but actively thwarting something is different than doing someone a favor. And legally, states and cities should not be required under the law to perform tasks that should be performed by ICE, for example, which includes detaining immigrants who have already served their time in jail and are set to be released. And that also includes making phone calls to ICE unnecessarily or asking people's immigration status when really that person just needs to go through the criminal justice system like everybody else. I don't say that just as an immigration attorney. I say that as a person who doesn't want to pay extra money for services that a city and state don't have to provide. It costs about $180 a day to house someone in immigration detention. Last year, it cost $10,000, well, close to $11,000 per deportee to deport people from the United States. This is a financial liability that lies on cities and states because the federal government is misleading about what is actually required. So no matter which side of the fence, so to speak, that you fall on, the dollars and cents really don't lie, okay? I also just want to make a plug and say undocumented immigrants in just the state of Minnesota, okay, pay about $875 million in taxes every year. There's a common misconception that undocumented immigrants don't pay taxes. That's not true. You can look that site up on the American Immigration Council's website, who uses numbers from the Department of Labor to create their statistics. And Minnesota would lose $4.4 billion in economic activity, $2 billion in gross state product, and approximately 25,000 jobs if all undocumented immigrants were removed. So it's in a city's best interest and in our state's best interest to support our immigrant community and make sure that there's a line drawn between what we have to provide and what the federal government can force cities and states to do. So I know that was a lot. I'm happy to clarify any of that if it was confusing, but that's it for me.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about my own experience as an immigrant in the U.S. and then also my role in Isaiah as an organizer. So I've been in the country for about 23 years. My parents brought me here when I was 2. And within those 23 years, I've lived in different areas. Normally grew up in Illinois, but we've moved a lot, and I've been in Minnesota for about 6 years now. And out of those 23 years that I've been here, I've been undocumented like 20 of them. And my whole family's undocumented. Whether it's because, it's like close relatives and then like not close relatives. So it's uncles, aunts, cousins. The only cousins that do have something is we have Daca, which I have that, and you talked a little bit about that, but which I have to apply for every 2 years and turn in information to immigration and pay them so that they can renew this permit. But there's no pathway to residency or citizenship through Daca, and it also doesn't, as mentioned, it doesn't protect me from deportation necessarily. So what it has done, though, it has given me the ability to have a job legally in the country and, get a car and drive with a driver's license. And I've been working with Isaiah with that permit for 3 years now. But that is part of the reason I do the work that I do with Isaiah as an organizer, and I organize our immigration work within the organization because of my own experience and also because this is something that my immediate family and close friends are going through right now. And there is definitely a big population of immigrants in Minnesota, and I think it's very diverse. But when I also think about, what are the things that are happening right now, I'm an immigrant from Mexico, and most of the time, even immigrants that are not from Mexico are tired of being targeted as like the Mexican, illegals and things like that, when that's not what happens. Just because people are of a certain color doesn't mean they're all from the same place. And that's how a lot of people see immigrants. Just because they're a certain color or they look a certain way, whatever way that is, people get targeted. So there is a diverse, even Latino immigrant community in Minnesota, and people have different statuses. And I think what's happening right now is that we see mixed status families. So within a family, you have people who are citizens, you have people who are residents, or you have people who, you know, are applying for some sort of permit to be here or have Daca. So just because one person within a family is documented doesn't mean that everyone's documented. And just because someone doesn't speak English doesn't mean they're undocumented. It's just so diverse now that putting people in one bucket is a big mistake. And that's why, you know, I'm happy that these kind of conversations are happening, because what really needs to happen is people need to get to know the immigrant communities within Minnesota and what's the difference between them, and how people get here and why are people here and things like that. But my work within Isaiah is I lead our immigration work, which includes the driver's license campaign. So Minnesota used to offer driver's license for everyone back in the day, and then around 2003, it was taken away by just a rule change. So it didn't even go through legislation. They didn't have the votes. But Governor Pawlenty took driver's license away from undocumented immigrants in Minnesota. So then you have all these immigrants who don't have documents, who don't have a driver's license anymore. It doesn't mean people stop driving. It just means they're driving without a driver's license. So it is a safety issue as well for the broader community, that people can't just get a driver's license like they used to. So that's one of the campaigns that we've been leading with a lot of partners that work on immigration in Minnesota, to get them to change the rule again and pass driver's license. And right now that's in the state legislation, and it's getting a little bit confused right now with the Real ID bill. So we're trying to educate people as well of like, what is the difference and what's happening with Real ID, and what does that have to do with driver's license for immigrants in Minnesota. The other thing that I work on is there is a private prison that's trying to open in Appleton, Minnesota. They are the owners and operators of the largest private prisons and detention centers in the country. So these are the same owners of the private detention centers that are in the border, that right now have Latin American women and children literally locked up in cages. So they have a horrible track record. They had to rebrand their company's name last year because of how horrible their record is with abuses that happen within these private prisons and detention centers. We do not have private prisons and detention centers in Minnesota, and part of the work we're trying to do is make sure that that doesn't exist in the state, where people can profit off of incarcerating, you know, people of color in general. And then I also, after the elections, anyone who works on immigration was just stacked with work. So part of the work I've been doing is setting up a sanctuary network. So we work within congregations in Isaiah. We are a statewide organization. We relate to over 200 congregations around the state. And part of the work that we do is we run campaigns depending on the communities that we work with within congregations. So my work primarily is with the Latino community within congregations around the state. And we decided that since we relate to so many congregations, a part of the role we could take is have congregations have a conversation about declaring sanctuary churches. So there is a memo that was signed by immigration that they said that they wouldn't go after to deport people within what they're calling sensitive locations, which are congregations, places of worship, schools, hospitals, and places where ceremony or, for example, like a march or rally are happening. Now, this memo can be taken away whenever. It's not law. It's not something that is really gonna make sure immigration doesn't go into congregations, but part of the reason we have done this work is because we are trying to create an environment where communities actually start talking about what's happening around immigration. And a lot of these communities don't have any relationship with immigrants within their own congregations. So part of the work we're doing is we have held forums, we have held teach-ins about immigration. What does this memo do? Why should churches declare sanctuary churches, and what does that even mean? So also not promising things that, you know, they can't promise to immigrants, but standing up for immigrants in different ways is the role that these sanctuary congregations have taken. So as of today, we have almost 40 congregations around the state that have declared sanctuary. And this is a broad range of also denominations. So we have Christians faith, we have the Quakers, we have the Jewish community. So it isn't just one denomination that thinks that this is something that, you know, they're being called to do. So within that, we have gotten so many people, at least I would say, like, awake or wanting to do something, that we have prepared with a coalition of organizations a rapid response hotline for immigration raids. So the way this hotline works is we're training dispatchers and people to rapidly respond to immigration raids anywhere in the state. And when these raids happen, the community members can call a hotline to then, that hotline will dispatch these rapid responders. So they're getting trained on how to become legal and moral observers in the case of immigration raids. And these necessarily isn't to stop immigration proceeding from happening, but it's more to open people's eyes to what happens when these immigration raids happen. Like, what is exactly what happens? What are the things that the immigration agents are doing? And what can they do and what can they not do? So part of the problem, I feel, that we're actually where we are right now around immigration is because it just has been certain sectors and certain communities that talk about immigration, but we haven't talked about it as a community in a broader way. And part of what we're trying to do is put this in the spotlight of the whole state and maybe even the country of what happens to people and how to support people when they're going through an immigration raid. Because after that happens, there's still the family that's left there without support. They don't know what to do. They don't know what are the resources that are available to them. So there's many things that happen during these times that have gone without help, and people don't know what to do. And you know, I also just want to add that it's not part of the reason we're doing all this work, but in reality, we're late to the game. You know, the Obama administration deported the biggest number of undocumented immigrants. This has been happening every day. This is happening as we speak right now. And no one, you know, like, we don't know. Right now, we're not seeing it happen. We didn't see it happen through these past 2, 3, 4, 5 administrations. And it happens all the time. So it has been normalized. And that is part of what the work that we're doing is. It's not normal. People shouldn't be going through this. It's not okay that kids come home and their parents are gone completely and they can't see them anymore, or vice versa. So the base that I work with, a lot of people have gone through this throughout the years. And it hasn't been brought up in Minnesota, so that's part of the work we're hoping this will start opening up.
Let's give them a round of applause. Very good, good information. If you took notes during the presentations and wrote questions down, now's the time to ask them. You can either approach the mic or use the index cards.
I think I should introduce myself. I'm a retired immigration lawyer, and for the first 30 years of my career, I worked for the Immigration Service. For the next 23 years, I represented aliens before the Immigration Service. My name is Michelle Egan, and one thing that you didn't mention is that Social Security gets a windfall from all the aliens that pay taxes, because they will never benefit from Social Security if they've worked during a period when they were not authorized to work. And that's a big part of what has saved Social Security, but nobody ever mentions it. The other thing is, as a person who's been involved for many years in deportation proceedings and with the ICE agents, when a person is arrested by an ICE agent, they never say that they have family here because they want to protect that family. As a result, young children, spouses are left with nothing. And there are provisions where the families would be helped, but nobody admits that they exist. So it's not on purpose that families are left by the federal government to fend for themselves. And there's I'm sure the immigration lawyers know for sure, and most of you do too, that that is why these families need help. Also, as a former private attorney myself, I have nothing against attorney's fees, but no immigration violation on the whole is a criminal offense. So while criminals get free lawyers, immigration violators do not. And it's very, very expensive. So I just thought I'd share those points as part of my career. I feel I should write a book someday.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the panelists? Well, let me just ask if there are, while people are writing their questions and giving some thought to this, we talked about different designations that could be had as a result of formalizing this value that the residents have. What are the long-term implications of either having a resolution or an ordinance addressing these issues?
I would say an ordinance is going to have the longest term impact, mostly because it's going to stay on active and enforceable for as long as until it's repealed, right? So if you write an ordinance, it becomes part of the Roseville City Charter, city codes, whatever they're exactly called here, and that doesn't go away. And I could be wrong, and someone else can jump in, but as far as I know, proclamations are not, or resolutions are not binding by the city officials.
So my question is two-part. The first part is the ordinances and the suggestions by the ACLU and ordinance such as what are in St. Paul and Minneapolis. Do they contain components that are illegal? And so, and the second question is, sometimes it's a hot button saying separation. Can you articulate a little bit more what separation means? Again, the issue of legality, is that what we're concerned about, or is this actually something that supports being legal?
Okay, and anyone else is welcome to jump in too, but so separation ordinance is the idea, the reason why we use the word separate is kind of building off a little bit what Kelly said, is that you should really separate city, state, county officials from federal officials, right? Federal officials are the ones who are kind of tasked with enforcing immigration laws. So the idea that there should be the separation between federal agents who are tasked with immigration, carrying on immigration, and separating them from city, state, and county who are not tasked with actually carrying out immigration laws as part of what they have to do. Now, it is true, Kelly mentioned the section, the federal law that talks about you can't get in the way of the federal government from doing their work, and you should not be kind of, inhibiting or, stopping them from doing that at all as a city or a state. But as far as I know, the Minneapolis and the St. Paul ones, they've never been challenged or by, for example, the federal government. But everything in them, was written by their city attorneys, and it's very clear that what kind of draws out, well, we are just going to make sure that we are protecting ourselves, and their ordinances aren't written in a way that would directly contradicts federal law. Right, the cities, there's a way you can draft your language to make sure you're not in direct violation of federal law. Now, it's true, the cities, the lawsuit that I had mentioned about where there was the good ruling about the executive orders, that was not actually Jeff Sessions or the Attorney General going out and suing cities for passing these ordinances. Instead, this was the cities themselves. San Francisco, the counties of San Francisco and Santa Clara filed lawsuits, and other cities have joined this, challenging the order's constitutionality. Okay, so the cities proactively sought out a lawsuit saying, we have these ordinances. We are going to sue because we think your executive order is wrong. And that's what the judges have said. So similar cities, right, proactively even going out And so far, their constitutionality has been upheld by the judge. And if you read the judges, it was issued by Judge Orrick in federal court, talking about how going after cities who have these ordinances actually violates the Constitution because it undermines both federalism and the separation of powers. And you can kind of read his whole decision where ordinances can be drafted where at least, a fair amount of people in the legal community would say it's not in violation of federal law.
Hi, I belong to a church in Roseville that has become a sanctuary support congregation, and we are part of a larger group that's beginning in discussions about how we can approach the city and city officials, and to see what might make sense that city officials can see and that other people here can see is for separation ordinance, something like that here. My question is that I understand that in Roseville, at least from some people from the school district, that at least 5 people have been detained by ICE officials, leaving behind their families, some with quite a number of children, without support. And I'm wondering if you have any numbers at all in Minnesota of the number of people who've been detained this year by ICE agents, and also if there's something that we concerned citizens can do to support those families.
In the Star Tribune on the 28th of April, they had an article, front page article, listing some of the numbers and stats around just that very question. And I can't find the period of time specifically in terms of month, but it says 620 immigrants arrested by the local ICE office, and 80% increase locally over the same period last year. Right, and it looks like it's pretty split between St. Paul office and it goes into whether it's criminal or non-criminal. So both criminal and non-criminal statuses have been affected by the detention. I'll leave this here so you can read it more carefully.
I might just jump in to hit the second part of your question. So as far as supporting your community members, okay, especially if you're going to be doing like a sanctuary congregation type of situation, or you belong to any sort of organizations within the city that have regular events. I know that probably all of us at some point have been involved in a Know Your Rights presentation, so that first and foremost, before anything happens, people know what their options are, when you have to answer the door, when you don't, where you can go if you're feeling threatened, how to prepare your family if you're working and you're worried about ICE waiting outside of your place of work at the end of the day, and how to prep for that. Having an immigration consultation or a legal consultation to figure out where you're going to go, like what your routes are once you do get picked up, because for a lot of folks it's inevitable at this point. And so just to know and have a plan in place before ICE shows up is really important, and can really relieve a lot of folks so that they understand if they'll be eligible for a bond once they're in immigration detention, how much that'll be, can they raise those funds before they get picked up, that sort of thing. So, and there are lots of organizations that are wonderful in the Twin Cities who are available to hold those presentations for free and give out lots of good advice. So that's what I would encourage you to do.
Go right ahead.
Yes, I have a question for the mayor. Since one of our panelists has spoken about the importance of passing an ordinance, and some cities have already done this, the question would be, is the mayor in support of an ordinance, and what kind of vote would it take to get it passed at city council?
Thank you. Do you have enough mics to be able to pass if I take this one for the resource people down here? Okay. So 2 things. First of all, I'm still learning a lot about this, so I don't have an opinion yet for sure on what I think should happen. So I know that might sound like a politician's answer, but I'm really trying to understand all the issues before I come to any conclusions, because I think that is the responsible way to approach it as an official. The second part of it is, in terms of any ordinance that the city passes, it needs to pass with a majority vote of the city council. So that's 3 out of the 5 members of the city council. There's not a supermajority requirement or anything like that. And I did want to respond to one thing about resolutions was mentioned. A resolution is a statement of policy by the city, and it also passes with a majority vote of the council in attendance at that meeting. And so it is binding on the city in the sense that that is a statement of the city's policy, and the city has essentially obligated itself to enforce it, but it is not a law. So the city can choose, I suppose, to not abide by its policy, and then the consequences are, having to answer for that to the members of the public who would like us to abide by our policy. So that's the response I would give to that. Hopefully that's somewhat responsive anyway.
You guys made some mention of, immigrants being potentially arrested and that type of thing. And I think there is sometimes a false, as I understand it, perception of immigrants as introducing more crime into the community, when in fact my understanding of the majority of studies of immigrants have found both that there's lower crime rates among immigrants versus native-born citizens, as well as lower crime rates in areas that have high immigrant populations. And so personally, as a citizen, my concern is less with immigrants committing crimes than with the public safety implications of immigrants being frightened to come forward to the police as witnesses, victims of crimes, reporting crimes that have happened to them or that they know of to happening to other people, or tipsters or informants to the police. I was wondering if you could speak to the criminality question, actual sociology of what has been shown with that, and the public safety implications of people being frightened to come forward to the police as witnesses, informants, etc.
Well, obviously, like you suggested, those statistics I have also seen are correct. Immigrants tend to commit less crimes. And as a former refugee and immigrant myself, I know, and having many, many friends and family members and people that I work with that are immigrants, and I know that people, when they come to this country, they are not really, they are more scared than their normal environment. You don't know this environment, you're new to this country, you try to be more careful, so definitely that's true. But with this new, the new climate, immigration climate, and immigrants being being afraid to call the police when they see problems happening in their neighborhood or to them, it's true. I mean, what's happening is that we've been having, executive orders and things coming out and not getting fully explained, or coming out with this new, the new administration passing out laws that without really giving the public enough time to understand what it is. Even individuals who aren't at risk of being deported, who have a legal status to stay in the country, are, it's seriously having a serious chilling effect on them, on communicating with law enforcement. For a lot of immigrants who might not speak the English language well enough, it's hard for them to tell the difference between the local police and ICE or the FBI or any other law enforcement personnel. So definitely everybody will try to not interact or to minimize their interactions with law enforcement. And obviously that would, when someone sees something that they normally would have called the police for, might not call, and that should have a concern.
I just want to add really quick, it definitely is a problem already. So there's already, domestic violence victims and, child abuse happening that families are not reporting because they fear that they will be targeted by the police officers responding and then sending them to immigration. So that already has happened forever and is currently happening. Obviously now, if we think about what we're hearing daily in the news, people are definitely, responding to that and are even more scared right now. But I would even also say That's true. And then the other thing that's true is that we're looking into a wide range of crimes. So wage theft, for example, it's a problem in Minnesota. And we have all these undocumented immigrants that don't get paid right. They don't, their employers abuse a lot about their rights, and they don't say anything or do anything about it because they're scared to be turned into immigration. That's a big problem right now with this new climate that people are living under. So it's a wide range of crimes that are not going to be reported because of people's fear to be targeted, because that has happened before. People have called for crimes committed on them and then have been deported or detained because of these things.
And I would just add one final thing is that I completely agree, lower crime rates among immigrant communities. But I would also say that that doesn't mean just because you didn't commit a crime that you're not going to get stopped by the police. We have a racial profiling problem in Minnesota. When we've done studies on it, it has ranged anywhere from 8 to 12 to 15 times more likely for you to get pulled over. We've gone after bad police officers in other places, especially in southern Minnesota, where there's a smaller, racial profiling happens anywhere, but we have sued police departments in southern Minnesota who've targeted immigrants, where we have officers who will sit outside and try to pull over as many people as possible because they think they can catch people that are undocumented. So even if you aren't doing anything wrong, that doesn't mean you're not going to get stopped by the police and start to get put through that procedures.
A question for Kelly, the mayor, the city manager, and the police chief. Just to help me sort it out for tomorrow night, what's one compelling reason to adopt a sanctuary ordinance, and what's one compelling reason not to adopt a sanctuary ordinance? Given your current understanding of the situation, you all have been looking at it more. So Kelly, if you could start off, then the mayor, the manager, and the chief.
Thank you. That's actually a fantastic question, and I'm glad you asked. I'm a little sad you made me go first, but that's okay. So that's something that, in Lauderdale we struggled with because everybody's jaw hit the floor when I showed up and said that we probably shouldn't do that. And the reason is because we contract most of our services, okay? So we don't have as much control over the policies made by different entities with whom we contract, okay? That's not the case in Roseville. You have your own police department who you can collaborate with. You have the mall, which houses a lot of business, and there's a lot of traffic coming through there from the surrounding area. It's good for business to have more people feel comfortable coming in and out of business, right? So I think one compelling reason to pass that kind of an ordinance or resolution or state of proclamation, for that matter, whatever the city decides, is attractive because basically, you can do it, okay? Which I think is pretty cool. And I think you can do it in a way that's legally safe for the city, that supports all of the members of its community, and in a way that people can kind of get on board with. So I think that that's one compelling reason, is because, you're buried kind of in the metro area, but you still have control over a lot of the services that you offer. One thing that gave me pause, okay, is that, again, after someone gets arrested in Roseville, they are then passed off to other counties. So perhaps it's on a warrant in Anoka or Dakota or whatever. Or they're just arrested straight up in Roseville for the first time in their life and they're taken to Ramsey County Jail. At that point, it's really Ramsey County's policies that kick in, and there's nothing Roseville can do about it, no matter if it's your resident or not. So that is a problem. And we received a document by email today from the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office that I'll reference a little bit because it made me chuckle. That if there's reasonable suspicion that a criminal immigration violation has occurred, this is coming from the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office, factors that can be considered in making that kind of determination include an admission from the person that they entered the United States illegally. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that's probably never happened. Maybe that's just me. I don't know a lot of people who raise their hand when that question is, if that question isn't asked. Let's see, reason to suspect that the person possesses immigration documentation that's forged. I don't know how you get there without racial profiling. And, you know, while a lack of English proficiency may be considered, it shouldn't be the only factor, but it can, you know, weigh in on their determination about whether or not to ask about if that person has violated immigration laws. So anyhow, that's not your police department, but it's certainly something that someone could find themselves facing after being in the city of Roseville. So certain things you can control, that's good. Certain things you can't, that's bad. That's my answer.
I think just in terms of, I'll stand up. Just in terms of the city, a reason to adopt the ordinance, as it's been stated, is that there's a clear definition or delineation within the parameters over which we have control, where the city will do what we will do and when we will do what we won't do. And I think that the notion of the separation ordinance really makes that clear. Certainly, I don't think we would want to adopt a separation ordinance that is in violation, or that we're saying we're going to thwart the federal government or anything like that. One of the arguments against it that I just thought about but don't want to portray it as compelling, but it came to mind, is that there are a lot of misperceptions out there across the political spectrum as to what such an ordinance or adopting such an ordinance means. And so that there's the potential that there will be implications in terms of how people look at Roseville. But once again, I don't want to make that sound like that is a compelling argument, but it is a reason to think about, especially maybe the language that we use or how we refer to it, especially so that we do whatever we can to help people understand what we are doing or what we're not doing. So that's just some things that came to mind. I don't know, Pat, as our city manager, if you've got anything else to add.
Just real quickly for the, and I'll bring the chief down here as well, for the reasons stated why we should be doing it, that's been well stated here. I think it's important to note that our policy in place, without any separation ordinance or any designation, is not to be asking people about their immigration status or do anything along those lines. I'll let the chief talk about that. I suppose the con you hear sometimes is that you have funding challenges. If you do that, they may be pulled away, and that's a changing tide every single day. You don't know what's happening with that. My analysis of what the city gets directly from the federal dollars is very small. Most of the dollars we do get are through the state or the county, through federal block grants and things like that. So we would not be directly impacted if that was truly going to happen. And all the conversation I have seen, it had to do with law enforcement. So we get other dollars for our community development department from the county to help with developments and stuff. Those, as far as I know, haven't been threatened, but those are indirectly. So they would probably, I'm not sure how that would work because they are gone to the county. And if Roseville has this designation that we're in jeopardy for losing that, I'm not sure how that would all work here. But my analysis doesn't show that we would lose a lot of direct money. So the financial impact, if there truly is going to be one, we don't know what's going to happen, might be pretty minimal here in Roseville.
Sure. As far as a reason for it, I don't think there's many people in the room here are comfortable walking up to a cop in a cop car asking questions, including me, an outside agency. So we take a lot of strides to make people feel as comfortable as they can to file reports and talk with us. So a reason for the separation ordinance would be so that everybody, and I mean everybody, would feel inclined to want to talk with us and not be afraid. The reason for not to have it, Pat talked about, would be if my advice to the city manager or my advice to the council would be our budget will be stripped of millions and millions of dollars if that were to happen, and that's not the case that Pat just talked about. And our policy is nowhere close to what the sheriff's office has. Our policy that's existed for a long time, it just says we recognize ICE and FBI and DEA and yada, yada, yada as agencies that exist that we could help if need be, but that's all it says.
So thank you so much for your presentations and whatnot. I'm curious what has been done to mobilize information after ordinances have been passed to people that live inside of the city, specifically like undocumented communities as well as allies that are concerned. You mentioned church congregations, which I think is really cool, but like a lot of times there's laws that are passed, but those laws aren't actually realized by the people that are mostly directly affected by them. So I'm curious about strategies that have worked in the past to distribute that information.
I mean, I think, so the Minneapolis and St. Paul ordinance have been there already, so they didn't happen like right after the elections. So people normally have known about them, but we have been doing a series, at least on the Isaiah front, and I know other immigration organizations that work primarily with the Latino community have been doing Know Your Right forums. And the Know Your Right forums talk about these separation ordinances in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And part of the work we're also doing is educating people about what those ordinances are, because I know the ACLU has recommended these 9 things, but that doesn't mean all ordinances have them. And then so we're teaching people what it is, right, that the ordinance actually protects them or doesn't protect them from. And then the other thing is also we have been talking about even names. So as Isaiah, we've been working in other cities to try to start passing separation ordinances, whether it's in the city or county level. And part of the work that we're doing is some people shy away from the word sanctuary cities, which is fine. If you don't want to name it sanctuary cities, don't name it a sanctuary city. You can name it anything you want. And so that's kind of the work we've been doing. And I know some other people have been doing Know Your Right forums.
I would ask the mayor or Pat, the city manager, to also weigh in on the gentleman's question as it relates to how you would notify residents about any pending action that you would take with respect to whatever you end up designating or whatever ordinance you end up doing, as well as any change that may occur. Let's say you don't do anything, but the practice and policy that the chief mentioned changes, which would have an adverse impact on a portion of your citizenry, how would they know that?
Well, through our normal process with anything, we do pretty robust notification process, whether it's through our website, through mail notices when appropriate, through other channels, through Nextdoor, if you're a member to that. All those types of things, we try to get the word out as much as possible and publish that, maybe have some things in the newspaper about an upcoming conversation. We just try to spread the word organically as much as possible to make sure people are aware. There's a lot of people that regularly follow the council actions, whether it's through email or just watching or showing up. I see a lot of familiar faces in here. So there's a lot of opportunity for people to get to know. As far as policies, when there are policies related to the city, that is a little bit more challenging because the city council doesn't necessarily approve the policies, but I would suppose that if there is a high profile on what we want to talk about and what's important, community value, that's something that could be brought forward and discussed, and we would communicate through our normal channels and try to spread the word as much as possible that this conversation is coming up.
I wanted to thank the panel for the information. I wanted to follow up with just the gentleman over here, his question about supporting families. I teach in Roseville. I live in Roseville. I teach in Roseville. I teach in a school that has a very high population of families, I think, that have been affected by the ban and the wall information that's gone out. I've been in Roseville as a teacher for about 10 years, so I have a lot of connections to other teachers who are deeply interested and care deeply about their students. And so when we hear that someone was detained and possibly then deported, sometimes they kind of come to me and said, what can we do? And so last January and February, we began to work as a group of teachers and social workers and liaisons that were involved as well with what information would we want to be included as the board study the issue of developing a resolution for the school district. But I remember at that meeting feeling quite strongly that this has to go beyond just the school district. It takes the whole community. It takes the chief of police, it takes the churches, it takes the citizens, because even though we're so deeply committed and care so much for the students that we have, our resources are limited, and we really needed to see, that everybody could be involved and want to know that we would provide as a whole community a safety net and as much protection as we can offer. There's no guarantees, we know that. But so that our students would know that when we say we're doing everything we can for you to be safe, that's the truth as a community. And it's really great to have all of this information, and yet to, remember, like for me to sit there with one of my students and hear her say, my family has started to make plans in case something happens, where we're going to go and what we have to do. And so for these reasons, I just applaud the city for looking at this and asking you, as you consider what you're going to do to move forward, to really help us all do our jobs, of keeping the youngest and most vulnerable that we have in our community. And I think they're all treasures and gifts just waiting to be developed, helping us have the tools that we need to nurture them and to say, nope, we know that. We've talked to people. We've heard from them. And we're doing everything we can to make sure that you're safe. And then hope that learning can happen on top of that. I have been asked often with Isaiah, with the churches, if there are sanctuary churches, are they advertised? Because, if they are advertised, does that make them a target? And I've never known what to answer that question. And then I also have another question too. I know I'm taking a little bit longer time, but it's come to our attention, and I didn't know if this would ever happen. Birth certificates are housed in the student cumulative folders. And so I can go in there and pull a birth certificate and see that a parent has excluded their place of birth, which feels like it's sort of obvious why that is the case. Could those records ever be confiscated legally for any reason? But I'm curious about the church question, and then the other I'm wondering about.
I'll answer the church question. Okay. So the list of congregations is available to anyone who asks for it. So for example, if the media asks for it, they can have the name of the congregation and the city that the congregation's in. Part of the strategy that we have kind of taken, and the stance that we have taken, is we are being public about this because we are making it unacceptable in our communities for people to keep getting deported. So the congregations that are, because we have sanctuary congregations, and within those we have the supporting congregations. The congregations that are sanctuary and will be hosting a guest or something like that, they're aware of that. They're aware that, that's one of the things they agree to. And I think, speaking on the faith-based perspective, I think that's our call as people of faith, to stand where people can't stand.
Thank you.
Okay, so I, in lieu of an answer for you, promised to get your mayor the answer to that question about the birth certificates. My gut reaction is that those are sealed records within the school. However, I've seen ICE, I haven't seen ICE. I have experienced situations in which ICE has gotten their hands on documents in a lot of different ways, like that couldn't be identified. So, but on the short, like if someone's undocumented, it's very easy for them to figure that out. I don't know that they'd need to knock on a school's door to do that. Mm-hmm. But just to follow up to your other question about how to support people, the other thing that I forgot to mention with your question, sir, was that if there are people in the community who are familiar with filling out legal documents, that could be paralegals, legal assistants, just people who have worked in the legal field, power of attorney forms are really important. And also, folks who practice family law will tell you about the different sorts of paperwork you can get done before, again, as a preemptive measure to designate a guardian for your child should you find yourself in that position. So there's a lot of things that people can do beforehand that is really, it's free. You can find the forms online most of the time and get that done first. So.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't plan to have several things to say, but I do. I was a teacher in Milwaukee, a Milwaukee public school for 4 years with mostly Latino children, Puerto Rican and Mexican, and I miss them. One family, the father was from Honduras, mother was from Mexico, and the father was deported because I think he didn't have a driver's license. And as a teacher, and this was 6 years ago, and as a teacher, I saw what that did to a family with 2 boys and a mother who works the night shift at McDonald's, an hour's bus ride away. and one child has no second ear, and so we have speech and language problems, hearing problems, and a whole community of a little family trying to manage all of that. So one way or another, we will end up taking care of people, and we might as well do it within the family if we say we have family values. Okay, that's one short thing. And that's also to say that if we let people work here, we might as well let them drive here and provide for it legally. That's my short argument for that. And I want to thank the city and the police for however you got the money to take care of the taillight sorts of problems. And I've meant to call and say specifically, I really appreciate that for everybody. I've been pulled over at midnight going home from this was in Wisconsin. At midnight, I didn't even know I was missing a little turn signal light. What on earth is I'm being stopped for? But, you know, it definitely happens. Then the last and most important thing, I have a petition that's been prepared by Isaiah that I am affiliated with very unofficially, that does ask us as residents of Roseville to sign this petition and ask that you would pass such an ordinance.
I'm interested in what is the status of the legislation about the Appleton prison right now, and is there still something we can do other than the fact that I've already called my 2 people at the Minnesota legislature?
I think we're keeping a close eye on it. Last year we organized so much around it that the governor said he wouldn't sign any bill for private prisons in the state. And part of the work that we're doing is, you know, the House knows that that is still kind of standing. So we don't think it's going to pass for votes right now. It might pass some committees, but it's not going to go to a floor vote. If it were to go to a floor vote, we would definitely let everyone know if people needed to show up for things like that. But right now, there's not a lot of movement on it this session.
And the other question I have is for the city people here. I actually am a city employee, but for a different suburb. And that city is taking a lot of proactive actions around equity. And they are looking at things like what is the makeup of our city employees, and tends to be mostly white, and they're trying to do some things proactively to try to help other groups actually get in the door at a city. And I'm really curious and don't know, even though I live here, what the city of Roseville is doing around the whole issue of hiring equity and just trying to make the community more welcoming, but also the city as an institution more welcoming.
That's a great question, and we have a lot of work to do on that. You might be referring to the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, the GARA program. Yeah. That is something a lot of cities are doing. We are planning on looking at doing that here for 2018. It is something that our councils have identified equity specifically as being really important in both our workforce to make sure that we look like the community represent and how do we better engage with residents across the board here. So it's going to be a concerted effort for sure in 2018. I think we're going to do what we can here in 2017 to keep striving towards that. But it's a very important issue for me personally, but also I know for the council, and they've really embraced that. So more to come on that.
In terms of some things we're already doing, I know the police chief has been involved in looking at ways to recruit new officers from communities of color throughout the area. And we've added to our community service officer program and tried to look outside of sort of the typical parameters, putting emphasis on people who speak multiple languages, people who have other experience in other cultures. And so that's something that's already going on, and we're continuing to do as much as we can in that area. So I wanted to make sure we mentioned that as well.
Great.
Yeah, I have 2 questions, both probably for the city. The first one is what the process is going to be for the council to consider an ordinance, whether we would need a petition or whether there's something already in progress for that discussion to happen. It feels like it's almost past time to get that done. So what's the process?
So a quick answer is that this is part of that process. And actually tomorrow night is the other part of the process. And certainly, petitions are great, but I think our objective in this process, having these two events, was to have the opportunity for folks to come together, have conversations, learn information, and then basically at the end of tomorrow evening, hopefully have a request that goes to the City Council. It would be my pledge to make sure that within the next couple of months of that request that the City Council takes action on it based on what our agendas allow to happen, but certainly not something where a request is made and then no action is ever taken.
Okay. My second question is if we have any visibility to impacts to businesses. I read in the paper the other day that particularly seasonal businesses are having problems because people are not willing to come into the country to take what in some cases have been long-term seasonal jobs. And certainly, for instance, local landscapers, I could imagine, would be in that bucket. But I also wonder about local restaurants or other people, and if we know yet if it's having an impact, the climate.
I can take a stab at it. I mean, one thing I will say is that certainly in Roseville, we've got a number of hotels and restaurants and the hospitality industry. It's very important to our local economy. And so if there are impacts, we certainly would notice them because of that. I think what's been sort of generally talked about here, and is something we ought to recognize, is that most everybody that comes to the United States, whether they come here through one process or another, is usually coming here to make their lives better. And one of the ways that is accomplished is through working. And so there are people in our community, as in many other communities, that are working to support their families, to support themselves, and to make their lives better. And that is basically the American way. And certainly we ought to be doing things to support that and encourage that in the community.
Just to add to that, part of the consideration in developing this as a two-part activity is because we believe that Roseville, unlike some of its surrounding communities, is a designation city of sorts because it does have the mall here. And so the action of the residents here impact not only the residents, but the general metro. The mall does very well here, and we want to make sure that it continues to do well. So you would consider these actions in light of that situation as well as your own residency status, which is unlike some of your neighboring communities.
I have two questions. I've become more and more aware of just how many, watching traffic stops and so forth, how many cars that don't look like cop cars and cops that don't look like cops. And my basic question is there any requirement as to the dress of ICE when they are making these contacts? So do they have to have a badge somewhere?
No, which makes it extra terrifying for people who are stopped. But there are plenty of police, or excuse me, not police. Sorry, Chief. Not police cars who are pulling over immigrants even just with a megaphone. Yeah. Sometimes they don't even have lights on their vehicle. I've had several clients think that they're legitimately being kidnapped, which in my opinion they are. But the point is, basically, there is no requirement is the short answer. So if you see that happening, more than likely, if it's legitimate, it's an ICE agent. But it's certainly something that perhaps, I don't know, maybe the chief has contacts with ICE, or I don't know if you know of people mistaking cop cars for ICE agents or things like that.
No, we don't have any connection with them. Minnesota law would apply to Minnesota police officers. Federal law would have to apply to federal ICE, FBI, all that stuff like that. But if you do see vehicles that are stopping cars that don't look like a squad car, I would ask you to call 911 because there are a lot of police impersonators across Minnesota that are active even as we speak. So that's a law that's being looked at, but it is fairly common. Several times a year we get information that someone's impersonating a police officer because they have nefarious things going on that are not endorsed by a government, federal, state, or local.
Thanks. The other one is, I'm concerned about a comment that the moderator made, that we just need to get plugged in. Because most of the people that we're talking about here tonight that need to know about these ordinance changes and so forth do not have extra shekels, extra money to buy, to have newspapers. General television doesn't cover this sort of thing. Most of them, many of the families do not have Wi-Fi or computer access. That's part of the school problem of having homework done and so forth. And so I would challenge the city to take a better look at how they might distribute information to segments of the society, such as what we're talking about. Granted, not all immigrants are low on the totem pole, but many of them are not very high on the economic income.
Thank you for
just
for
real
that.
quick comment on that. That's a great point here. I failed to mention that the non-electronic means that we could use depends a little bit on the time. And we do have a newsletter that hopefully you all get every other month here that goes to every single resident and every business in here, and that's free of delivery to you folks. That comes once every 2 months, so depending on the timing of when we're doing stuff, we can certainly publicize that, but that it doesn't always work out on a you have to plan another month ahead before that, so you have to kind of know what the plan would be. But that's a great opportunity to connect with everybody. But your point's well taken. We just can't totally rely on electronic means and hope people get the word, because not all people are connected.
I have a question and comment to the mayor and follow up to the pros and cons question earlier. My family came to Minnesota after the Japanese internment camps, specifically because Minnesota was so welcoming to the Japanese community. They used to describe Minnesota as a place you could actually get your hair cut, and it was through this military base thing. Minnesota was the only bidding on it because it was associated with Japanese people, because it taught Japanese language. Uncle Grant was taught in that. And I still have family, like my grandfather still lives in Roseville, and on the comment of the pros and cons about what people would think of Roseville, would you consider moving that from the con to the pro for being a sanctuary city?
I think it could go both ways for sure.
Hi there. I actually have two questions. One, I'm just curious. I'm wondering how the increased awareness is affecting not the people of color. Are we seeing like increased attention, incarceration, deportation of, European people? That's question number one. And then the second is, I just kind of want to address the other side. What do you say to the people who are saying, they're here illegally, they don't deserve to be here, they don't deserve the help? And I want to know what a good factual counterpoint discussion point is. I mean, I haven't heard it brought up, but I know there's people in Roseville who are saying it.
For your first question, I mean, I'm only going to talk about kind of, my area. I only get phone calls specifically from the Latino, and also I've been shared more awareness about the Liberian community being targeted as well in Minnesota, but definitely not, people that look European or on that side, because there's definitely like an issue of racial profiling with people around their color. And then the second question, I would only say, I think it's, I don't think one conversation can move people that feel that way about something. I think it takes like a lot of conversations from different areas and things like that. I do say that I have had forums where I have to answer those kind of questions, and one of the things that I tell people a lot is you can't really look into immigration reform without considering foreign policy and how the United States has been part of foreign policy that has triggered migration from Latin American countries and Mexico to this country. So one of the things I tell people is to even do some research on that first, and then come back, and ask more questions. But I definitely think that one of the things that I suggest people to do in this kind of environment is let people express themselves fully without trying to change their mind in the first conversation.
I think that's really good advice. I'm actually a little shy to follow up on that, but as far as the increased number of, white Europeans, I can't tell you about any statistics, but I would say, just as kind of a public service announcement, just because someone looks like perhaps they're, of European descent does not make them safe, certainly, okay? And the second thing is, as far as, sorry, what was your second question? Oh, sure. I mean, there's a lot of facts out there, and I think foreign policy is a good place to start as well. What I will say is a lot of folks who are coming up from the Northern Triangle in Latin America, which is like Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and also in Mexico as well. I mean, the dangers that people are facing there are truly unbelievable. If you Google a newspaper in El Salvador or Honduras or Mexico or Guatemala, I mean, the front page is usually very graphic photos of the slaughterings that are happening by gang members of random people and also people who are being targeted there. So I'd say no one feels safe in a lot of those circumstances. And for me personally, people who are fleeing that kind of a situation, based in fact, deserve to get out of that situation. That's just basic human rights. So I think that's a good place to start as well.
To the first question, which was, are you noticing individuals maybe from Europe who are getting deported also? I mean, I think it's really hard to compare that because at this time, I don't know any European country that's either going through a civil war or is having a serious, catastrophe. I mean, but that doesn't mean that never happened in Europe. And when it did, the Europeans who were seeking safety came through places like Ellis Island and were accepted and welcomed. And they didn't have to jump the borders and hide to be in the country. So I think that's just my answer to that question. I don't see too many. However, at Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, I had one client who was a European who came here as a child with his parents, who had a green card, thought he was as Minnesotan as anybody else, but ICE got him. He was in custody. We were able to help him, but being a European didn't save him at all in that situation. But the reason why more people of different other races is just the fact that what's happening in their countries. Normally, nobody likes to leave their home. Nobody wants to go to, I just don't like Somalia, I just don't like Mexico, I'm gonna go to the United States. There's gotta be, there are reasons that are forcing people to leave their homes that are made so difficult or unbearable for them to stay that they came here. They're already here now. It's just a matter of being a humanitarian and what to do about them now and how to deal with them like just normal human beings, like your family and my family, just regular people who are trying to make it.
I guess this was mostly directed towards the police chief. I was wondering, there's been some mention of Ramsey County facilities being used in detention stuff. Have you had experience with Ramsey County in terms of whether they are one that does a separation of powers with ICE or not, either way?
Sorry, I don't. We're so separate from that part of the judicial system. I have no idea.
There has at least been some talk from the sheriff that they're trying to be better. So Sheriff Stanek for Hennepin County and Sheriff Bostrom, for Ramsey County. What did you say? Oh, okay, thank you, sorry. They have both said things that yes, we want, we will do X, Y, and Z, but they are not necessarily, they don't have a set ordinance or a policy they have to follow. So even if they may say, yes, we want to treat immigrants well, we may not call, I'm unaware of anything that would actually force them to follow that. And someone like Sheriff Stanek in Hennepin County has changed what he has said all the time.
Sorry, just real quickly, what I will say, the difference between an ICE hold and having certain space at the Ramsey County jail are two separate things too. So I will say that recently I've had clients who are detained under immigration hold at Ramsey County, meaning the county is renting space to ICE at the very least.
You've been a very great audience, and I just want to end with one thing, and that is to allow Mickey, who's here from the International Institute, to say a few words if there's something you'd like to add to the conversation that has been going on.
Thanks, everyone, for having this conversation. I would like to just say that, so my office resettles refugees among many other services that we provide to the new American community. And we do have quite a few clients who live in Roseville, partly because of the existing communities. So as Amiin was saying, a lot of the refugees who come to Minnesota are joining family members and friends who are already here. So we have quite a few clients who live here, and we've worked pretty closely with the city on issues that have come up or topics they would like us to address with clients. And so I just want to offer our ability to kind of facilitate that communication. A lot of our clients don't have access to technology or traditional news sources, and so we'd be very happy to continue to communicate any new policies or any concerns with our clients. And also we've invited Kooren and other city officials to come to our cultural orientation classes and directly address our clients and our students, and to just kind of help them understand, who works in the city government and how to access services in the city. So we're very happy to continue doing that, and this is just a great conversation, and just want to thank everyone for continuing to welcome their new neighbors.
Thank you. And a nice round of applause for our panelists. They've been great, provide very good information. Mayor?
I'll just add my thanks to everyone who's already made their thanks, to everyone who's here tonight and participating and interested in this topic, and as well as the panelists and Marquita for facilitating the conversation. Part 2 tomorrow is important. As I said, that's the message to the City Council about do we want to have a policy, what form should it take, what should be included, all those sorts of things, because that then will be what the council considers as we take up this issue. I did want to just add one thing related to the Ramsey County and Hennepin County. They also do have county boards who make the laws for the county, and certainly that would be an issue to take up with county commissioners, of which we have our county commissioner, Mary Jo McGuire, up here in the room. So perhaps she will be available to answer questions. And one of the things I don't know the answer to in relation to that is the relationship between the sheriff's department and the county board, because of the fact that the sheriff is an elected official, and there's some different aspects of their form of government that don't apply to cities. So I don't pretend to be an expert on that, but perhaps Mary Jo can be. So once again, thank you all for being here. Tomorrow night is at the Roseville Skating Center at the Oval, which is over right by City Hall. We look forward to seeing everybody here, and we want to make sure that you take what you've heard this evening and learned, and the questions that have been answered. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to your family, and certainly invite folks to join you when you come tomorrow for that conversation. We look forward to an opportunity to have a variety of points of view represented and be able to have a good, robust conversation as a community about these issues and how we as a community want to move forward. So thank you again, and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow night.